I was a maintenance technician at a distribution center outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And if you had asked me a week before everything fell apart what I was good at, I would have given you a boring list. Electrical troubleshooting, diesel generator checks, forklift battery maintenance, patching roof leaks, replacing door rollers, and making old equipment run long enough for management to pretend they did not need to replace it. I was 36 years old, divorced, living alone in a rented duplex in Middletown, and most of my days were the same in a way that used to bother me and now feels like a gift I did not understand when I had it. My name is Daniel Mercer. Most people at work called me Dan. I worked second shift 3 days a week and first shift 2 days a week, which meant my sleep schedule was always a little off. It also meant I was awake and on the road at odd hours when the first signs started showing up, and because I spent my life looking at systems instead of headlines, I noticed the systems failing before I understood what was causing it. It started with late trucks and bad explanations. We moved packaged goods, household items, paper products, bottled drinks, and seasonal stock for regional stores. Nothing glamorous, but it was the kind of warehouse operation that depends on schedules lining up across several states. We had outbound loads stacking up because inbound trailers were missing their slots. Dispatch blamed highway closures. Drivers blamed fuel shortages. Managers blamed a temporary labor issue. Then our receiving lead, Monica Reyes, told me 3 drivers had refused to enter a city route near Philadelphia because they said people were swarming stopped traffic and pulling on cab doors. Monica was not the type to repeat rumors. She had worked shipping and receiving for 14 years and knew the difference between internet nonsense and a real operational problem. She was 42, former Army National Guard, organized in a way I respected, and usually the calmest person in the room. When she told me this was not normal, I listened. That same day, our facility manager, Brent, called everyone into the break room and gave a speech about staying focused, staying professional, and avoiding misinformation. He said there were public health disruptions in several urban areas, and that county authorities might recommend temporary curfews. He also said we would remain open as long as safely possible, which was management language for we do not know what is happening, but we are going to act like we do. People laughed at him because that is what people do when they are nervous, and the person in charge sounds like a memo. Nobody laughed 2 days later when half the first shift did not show up. By then, I had seen enough with my own eyes to stop thinking in terms of rumors. On Route 283, just after 6 a.m., I passed a line of cars backed up near an exit. At first, I thought it was a collision. Then I saw people moving between the vehicles in a way that did not make sense, not helping, not checking on anyone, just moving, crowding, pulling at doors, leaning into windows. Drivers were trying to reverse on the shoulder. One pickup had crossed the median and was angled the wrong way. I kept moving because traffic in my lane was still rolling, and because the part of my brain that solves problems could not classify what I was seeing fast enough to act on it. That afternoon, county alerts came through our phones with a shelter-in-place recommendation for parts of Dauphin County and neighboring areas, and the wording was strange. It told people to stay inside, secure entry points, and avoid contact with agitated individuals exhibiting extreme confusion or aggression. It said emergency response times would be delayed. It said not to travel unless necessary. People began leaving the warehouse in the middle of shift. Some went to pick up kids. Some went to check on parents. Some just left because they had that look in their face I would later recognize as the moment a person stops believing normal life will restart tomorrow. I stayed until the end of shift because the generator room alarm panel was throwing a fault and Brent wanted it cleared before he locked the building. I remember that detail because I sometimes ask myself if leaving 2 hours earlier would have changed anything. It would not have changed the roads. It would not have changed what happened to the gas stations. It would not have changed the fact that by the time I got home, the neighborhood already felt wrong. No music, no lawn mowers, no kids outside, no dog walkers. Just closed doors and the occasional engine revving too hard somewhere in the distance. I parked in the duplex lot, carried in my tool bag, and stood in my kitchen listening to the silence while my phone buzzed with messages from people I barely spoke to in normal times. You seeing this? You home? Don't go out. Call me. Stores cleaned out. My sister Leah called from York. She teaches 3rd grade, lives with her husband and 2 boys, and she was trying hard to sound steady for me while clearly panicking. She said schools were closing. She said a neighbor's son worked at a hospital and told them intake was overloaded with people having seizures, fevers, confusion, and violent episodes. She asked if I could come there. I told her the roads looked bad and I wanted to stay put until morning. We agreed to check in every 4 hours. That was the last normal conversation I had with her. I need to be careful how I explain the next part because I do not want to make it sound like I predicted anything. I did not. I was scared and half in denial like everyone else. But I did have one advantage. I knew how fast support systems fail when too many people try to use them at once. I had seen storm response, fuel delivery delays, grid transfer issues, and panic buying during smaller emergencies. So, instead of sitting on my couch watching clips and rumors, I started doing what I knew how to do. I made a list. Water, food, power, heat, security, medical, communications, sanitation, sleep. I checked what I had. 2 cases of bottled water, maybe 10 gallons total if I included what was in jugs from a camping trip. Pantry food for a week and a half if I stretched it. A propane camp stove in the garage, 1 20-pound propane cylinder about half full. Basic first aid kit. Work gloves, flashlights, batteries, a handheld radio I barely used. My personal tools plus some specialized stuff from work that happened to live in my truck because I had borrowed them for a weekend project months ago. A clamp meter, spare fuses, heavy extension cords, a small inverter, and a portable battery jump box. Security was the weak point. I owned 1 legal firearm, a pump-action 12-gauge shotgun I kept locked in a small safe, mostly because my father insisted every adult should know how to handle one safely, and because we occasionally went clay shooting before he passed away. I had a limited number of shells. I also had a baseball bat, a pry bar, and a can of bear spray from a hiking trip. I am not a tactical person. I am a maintenance guy who reads manuals and labels his storage bins. I filled my bathtub and every clean container I could find with tap water before pressure dropped. That turned out to be the smartest thing I did on day 1. I charged everything. I put blackout curtains over the front windows and moved a bookcase against the back door more for peace of mind than actual protection. Then I sat at my kitchen table and listened to the county scanner feed on my phone until the feed went down. By midnight, I could hear shouting from 2 streets over, then a car horn that would not stop, then something heavy hitting something metal, then nothing. I texted Leah, no reply. I texted Monica. She replied once. At home, locked down, stay inside, save battery. At 3:15 a.m., the power went out. Most people in my neighborhood had electric stoves and heat pumps. It was early spring, cold enough at night to matter. The silence after the power dropped was worse than the noises before it. You do not realize how much background sound modern life makes until all of it is gone at once. I slept maybe an hour in a chair. At 7:30 a.m., I checked outside through a gap in the curtain and saw my neighbor Tom loading his SUV. Tom was retired, former state inspector, always wore clean boots and talked too much about drainage. His wife Carol sat in the passenger seat holding a cat carrier. I opened my front door an inch and called his name. He jumped like I had fired a shot. He came over fast and kept looking behind him while he spoke. He said they were heading to their daughter's place near Carlisle because people were getting into houses closer to the highway. He told me to come with them. I asked how the roads were. He said not good. He said there were stalled vehicles everywhere, and people were walking in groups, and he did not think they were thinking clearly. Carol leaned on the horn, and he flinched again. I almost went. I still think about that. But I looked at my truck, looked at the narrow street, pictured getting trapped in traffic with nowhere to move, and I heard my own voice say, I need to stay and secure my place. Tom stared at me for a second, then nodded in a way that said he thought I was making a mistake, but did not have time to argue. He drove off. I never saw them again. By midday, the neighborhood changed from quiet to unstable. A few houses had people moving in and out, hauling bags, trying to leave. Others were shut tight. I saw one man running down the sidewalk with no shoes and no coat, yelling for someone named Anna. Around 1 p.m., two people I did not recognize came up the street testing car doors. They were moving in a jerky, unfocused way, and not reacting to anyone shouting at them from inside houses. One slammed into a parked minivan and kept pressing against it like he did not understand the object was there. That was the first time I saw behavior I could not explain as panic or looting. I stayed inside until late afternoon, but by then I knew the duplex was a temporary solution at best. It was too exposed, too close to the road, too dependent on a neighborhood I could not control. If things got worse, one broken window nearby could bring trouble to every house in a row. I needed a place that was easier to defend, quieter, and farther from foot traffic. I also needed a place with access to water and enough cover to work without being seen. I knew exactly one location that fit all of that, and that I could reach without driving into the center of any town. An old maintenance service property near the Conewago Recreation Trail Corridor west of Elizabethtown, not far from old rail alignment and farmland. Years earlier, our company had rented overflow storage in a small industrial yard off a secondary road. The lease ended, the owner died, and the place had mostly sat unused. I had been there dozens of times. It had a chain-link fence, a cinder-block utility building, an old pole barn, and a shallow well system that used to feed a wash line before environmental rules changed and the operation shut down. I did not know if the well still worked. I did know the property was screened by trees on two sides and easy to miss if you did not know the turn. It was not a bunker. It was not fantasy. It was a practical site with problems I understood. I made the decision at 4:20 p.m. and started packing like I was loading for a job, not escaping the end of the world. Tools first, water second, food third, bedding, clothing, fuel, medical, lights, fasteners, tarps, extension cords, handsaw, cordless drill, and spare batteries. Charger, even though power was down because habits matter. A 5-gallon gas can from the garage. My shotgun in a locked case and the shells in a separate ammo can. Important papers in a zip bag. I filled my truck bed and back seat until I could still see out the mirrors and no more. I wrote a note and left it taped inside the kitchen window where someone checking the house might see it. Gone to look for family. No food here. I do not know if it helped. It made me feel less likely to come back to a smashed place if anyone broke in looking for supplies. I left at 5:05 p.m. The drive that normally took 25 minutes took almost 2 hours because I avoided main roads and had to detour around blocked intersections, abandoned cars, and once a school bus sitting sideways where 2 county roads met. I saw people on foot everywhere. Some looked like families carrying bags and moving with purpose. Some looked confused, wandering, changing direction without reason. Twice I had to stop while groups crossed the road. I kept my doors locked and my eyes forward. I did not stop for anyone, and that is one of the things that still sits heavy in me. At one point, near a small bridge, a man pounded on my passenger window and pointed behind him, shouting for help. There were 2 figures coming down the ditch line toward him, moving fast but uneven. He looked terrified. I had a half a second to decide whether to unlock the door. I saw his hands, saw no weapon, saw what looked like a bite mark on his sleeve but could not tell if it had broken skin. I drove. He slapped the side of the truck as I pulled away. In the mirror, I saw him stumble. I did not see what happened next. If you are listening to this because you want a story about instant bravery, I am not your guy. I was scared and trying to survive the next 10 minutes. That is the truth. I reached the old service property just after 7 p.m. as the light was dropping. The gate chain had rusted and the padlock was gone. I pulled in, closed the gate behind me as best I could, and parked the truck in the shadow of the pole barn. The place looked worse than I remembered. Tall weeds, roof panels missing on one side of the barn, broken glass in the utility building windows, and a smell of damp wood and old oil. But the cinder-block building was still standing solid, and when I tested the metal entry door, the frame held. I moved the truck inside the barn where it was less visible from the road, then spent the last light doing the fastest security sweep of my life. Utility building first. 2 rooms and a closet, empty except for old shelving, a rusted sink, a dead refrigerator, some moldy paperwork, and a steel workbench bolted to the floor. No people, no animals. The windows were cracked but barred from the inside with old welded mesh. The rear door was swollen shut but intact. The roof had 1 leak line in the corner, but most of it looked sound. Pole barn next. Open sides on 2 bays, enclosed back section with sliding door stuck halfway. I forced it enough to look in. Old drums, broken pallets, a small tow-behind compressor that had not moved in years, and mouse droppings everywhere. No immediate threat. Fence line after that. 1 section down in the back where a tree limb had fallen through years ago. I marked it mentally and went back inside before dark fully set. That first night in the utility building was the moment the idea of my own refuge stopped being a title in my head and turned into work. Not a heroic refuge. A drafty concrete box with a bad smell and a leaky corner. But it was mine to improve. And improving things is what I know how to do. I did not use any lights visible from outside. I hung a moving blanket over the interior window opening between the two rooms and used a headlamp on, low, pointed at the floor while I unpacked. I set up a sleeping area on a pallet with folded tarps and a camp pad. I stacked water and food against the interior wall. I put tools in order on the bench because if I was going to stay calm, I needed to be able to find things without thinking. Then I sat down, listened, and realized how far away the road noise was compared to my duplex. Around 10 p.m. I heard movement outside the building. Slow steps in gravel. A pause, then a scrape at the metal door. Not pounding. Not words. Just pressure. Like someone leaning. I froze, one hand on the shotgun case, and waited. The scrape came again, then a low thump against the door panel, then another. No voice. No call for help. I switched off my headlamp and stood still for what felt like an hour, but was probably 7 or 8 minutes. Eventually, the sounds moved away toward the barn. That was my first lesson in this new world. Invisible and quiet was better than strong and loud. At first light, I started turning the building into something livable. Day 1 priorities were straightforward. Secure openings, establish water, create sanitation, and reduce visibility. I used plywood from the barn, old shelving panels, and screws for my truck to board the lower half of the 2 cracked windows from the inside, leaving narrow viewing slots I could cover with black fabric. I reinforced the front door frame by adding a steel angle bracket I scavenged from the workbench rack, and lag screwed into the block with masonry anchors from my toolbox. It was not pretty, but it reduced flex. I wedged the rear door shut permanently with a brace against the interior wall and sealed the gap at the bottom with folded rubber mat to cut drafts and smells. Water was the bigger question. Behind the building was the old wellhead and a pressure tank shed attached to the wall. The electrical controls were dead, obviously, but the well casing looked intact, and the hand valve assembly for a bypass spigot was still there under a layer of grime. I spent 2 hours tracing the line layout from memory and physically, cleaning fittings and checking for cracked sections. The electric pump would not run without power, but the system had a manual draw point used for priming and maintenance. It was not designed for daily use, but with a hand transfer pump from my truck and some improvised fittings, I could pull water up in batches if the well still held. When I finally got cloudy water into a bucket around 11:40 a.m., I almost laughed from relief. It smelled mineral-heavy but not foul. I let sediment settle, filtered it through cloth, then boiled a pot on the camp stove, and treated additional batches with purification tablets from an old camping kit. I would later build a proper filter setup using food-grade buckets, gravel, sand, and activated carbon from aquarium stock I found at a farm supply store. But on that first day, water exists here was enough to keep me going. Sanitation was next. There was no working sewer connection I trusted. I set up a bucket toilet system in the closet using heavy contractor bags, absorbent material from old wood pellets broken down, and disinfectant. Not glamorous, but controllable. I designated one corner for clean water and food only, and enforced that rule on myself immediately. Small habits keep big problems from starting. By late afternoon I was exhausted and filthy, but the building already felt less like an abandoned outbuilding and more like a workshop. My workshop, my refuge, was not built in a day, but it started that day with screws, tarps, and boring decisions. I did not stay alone for long. On my third morning at the property, just after 8 a.m., I heard a vehicle engine cough near the road, then die. I watched through the slit in the boarded window and saw an older white cargo van stopped half in the grass near the gate. A woman got out first, raising both hands immediately, as if she already knew anyone still alive was watching from cover. A man stepped out from the passenger side slower, leaning on the door. There was a child in the back seat looking through the glass. I stayed hidden and called out through the door without opening it. "Keep your hands where I can see them. What do you need?" The woman answered clearly and without drama. "Fuel, if you have it. Water, if you can spare it. We can trade. My husband is hurt." That voice mattered. No frantic yelling, no fake friendliness, direct information. I asked them to step back from the van and sit on the gravel where I could see both of them. The woman did it immediately. The man hesitated, then sat carefully. The child stayed in the van. I watched for several minutes. No strange movement. No one trailing them that I could see. Finally, I opened the door enough to keep cover and had my shotgun visible, but pointed down. The woman nodded once when she saw it, like she approved of the safety position. "I'm Rachel Kim," she said. "This is my husband, Aaron. Our daughter is Mia. We came from Lancaster County trying to reach Rachel's brother in Perry County. We got forced off the main roads. Aaron cut his leg yesterday on sheet metal. It's cleaned, but he can't put full weight on it." Aaron looked pale but alert. He was in his 40s, wearing a mechanic's work shirt and work boots. Rachel, maybe late 30s, had a nurse's posture even before she told me later she was an emergency department nurse practitioner. Mia looked about 9 and held a stuffed fox with one ear missing. I did not invite them in. Not yet. I brought out 2 gallons of treated water and a small amount of fuel after Rachel showed me what they had to trade. Canned food, a case of shelf-stable milk packs, medical supplies, and, most valuable to me at that stage, 2 sealed boxes of heavy-duty nitrile gloves and a battery-powered lantern. Rachel offered to look at my own supply setup in exchange for more water. I told her to wait. Trust, at that point, was a controlled leak, not an open valve. Then Aaron tried to stand and nearly went down. The cut on his lower leg had soaked through the improvised bandage. Rachel moved to him fast, and I saw how tired she was in the way her hands shook once and then steadied on purpose. That decided it. Not because I suddenly became noble, because a trained medical professional and a careful mechanic with a kid were worth more as allies than as strangers on the road, and because if I sent them away and they were found nearby later, I would hear that in my head every night. I moved them into the utility building one at a time after a quick check for injuries and obvious signs of illness. Rachel did not argue with the check. She actually told Mia, "Mr. Mercer is doing the right thing." That bought her more trust with me than any speech could have. Aaron's wound was a deep laceration along the calf from a jagged metal edge. Not what I had feared. It needed irrigation and proper dressing. Maybe stitches originally, but it was past that point. Rachel cleaned it again on my workbench while I boiled water and held a flashlight. She worked like someone used to chaos, talking steadily to keep Aaron relaxed and Mia calm. She asked what I had for meds. I showed her everything. She reorganized my entire medical corner in 20 minutes and made it 10 times more usable. By evening, we had made a temporary deal. They could stay 48 hours while Aaron rested, and then we would decide next steps. Rachel and Aaron contributed food, medical skills, and labor as able. Mia helped by doing what kids sometimes do better than adults in bad situations, following instructions exactly and making the room feel human again. Those 48 hours became a week, then 2, then the beginning of a real group. A refuge is not just walls, it is rules. We wrote ours on cardboard with a paint marker and hung them by the door. No outside contact without a plan. No loud work after dark. No lights visible from outside. Water use logged. Food use logged. One person on watch at all times in daylight. If anyone feels sick, report immediately. No one opens the door alone. That last rule came from an incident on day 6. Around noon, a man came to the gate yelling that his wife was pregnant and needed help. Rachel was already moving toward the door before I stopped her. The man sounded real, terrified, desperate. He kept saying, "Please, just water." But he also kept changing where he pointed when he said his wife was in the truck. I watched through the slit and did not see any truck. Then Aaron, from the floor where he was resting, said quietly, "He's stalling for someone." I looked left and saw movement in the tree line near the fence. 2 more adults crouched low. One had a pry bar. Maybe they were desperate too. Maybe they had a real wife somewhere. I do not know. What I know is they were setting up to rush the door when we opened it. I told the man to back away from the gate. He started cursing and kicking the chain link. Rachel took Mia into the back room. I chambered around loudly enough to carry through the door and said, "Leave now." He backed off. The 3 of them disappeared into the trees. After that, our rules got stricter, and nobody complained. The next month was the hardest because it was the phase where everything you built was still fragile. We were not starving, but food was a constant calculation. We were not thirsty, but water treatment took labor and fuel. We were not freezing, but nights were cold enough that poor planning would have made us sick. We spent every day turning an abandoned property into a small system that could support 4 people quietly. Aaron could not do heavy work for almost 2 weeks, but he could think and direct. Before the outbreak, he ran a small auto repair shop in Lidditz. He knew engines, small motors, fuel contamination problems, and fabrication better than I did. Once his leg improved, he and I inspected the old tow-behind compressor in the barn and stripped it for useful parts. Hoses, fittings, gauges, belts, fasteners, and a small gasoline engine that might be salvageable. We also found an old hand truck, 2 intact steel cabinets, and enough angle iron to build bracing. Rachel handled medical, hygiene, and routine. Routine sounds small until you have none. She set cleaning schedules, hand-washing protocols, and quarantine procedures in case one of us got exposed. She taught Mia and then all of us how to remove gloves properly and how to separate clean and dirty surfaces when treating wounds. She also did triage on every one of us daily at first. Temperature checks, hydration, sleep, stress signs. It kept minor issues from becoming dangerous. Mia became our signal spotter from inside because she was patient and observant. We turned one viewing slit into a marked clock face with tape, and she would call out positions if she saw movement near the road. 2 people at 1 o'clock. Truck at 11 o'clock. Deer at 3 o'clock. She took it seriously because we took her seriously. My main jobs were structural work and utilities. I repaired the back fence using salvaged chain link, tension wire, and steel ties. I built a second interior barrier just inside the utility building entry, using the steel cabinets laid on their sides and anchored. creating a short dogleg so the main room could not be seen if the front door opened unexpectedly. I rigged rain capture off the better side of the roof with gutters made from split PVC pipe scavenged at a nearby farm supply yard and fed it into cleaned drums. Rainwater reduced how often we had to pull from the well and saved fuel for boiling. The biggest upgrade came when Aaron and I managed to bring a small generator online. It was not at the property. We found it during a supply run to a closed landscaping company 7 miles away. The place had already been picked over, but behind a locked maintenance cage was a portable inverter generator, about 3,000 watts, with a dead battery for electric start but pull start capable. We did not take it immediately. We evaluated the risk, checked fuel storage, planned the route, and returned before dawn the next day with hand carts and a siphon. That was how all our supply runs worked. Not action scenes. Planned maintenance calls with fear added. We traveled early, avoided main roads, and never stayed longer than needed. We took what was useful and transportable: fuel stabilizer, chain, fencing staples, tarps, bleach, canned food, dog food, which can be traded even if you do not have a dog, water containers, hand tools, seeds, batteries, work lights, and once, from a municipal storage yard, a box of reflective traffic signs we later used as weather-resistant wall panels. If we entered a building, one person stayed on lookout, one collected, and one kept the route clear. Rachel joined some runs when medical supplies were likely. Mia stayed at the Refuge unless all signs said the route was quiet and we had no choice. I need to explain the zombie part in a way that matches what we actually saw. We called them infected because that was what made sense. Some were clearly sick and disoriented, but still responsive in small ways. Others were far gone, moving toward noise and motion, repeating simple physical patterns, colliding with obstacles, pressing against doors or fences. They were not movie monsters. They were people with a severe condition, and the tragedy of that never stopped being true even when they were dangerous. The reason they became so dangerous was not magic. It was numbers, unpredictability, and the collapse of services that would normally isolate and treat something like this. What changed over time was behavior in groups. Early on, single infected wandered. Later, we saw clusters forming around recurring sounds, engines, metal impacts, even a loose sheet of roofing that banged in the wind 2 properties over. That taught us to secure every rattle and squeak. Noise discipline became survival, not paranoia. We also learned scent and food management mattered. A torn trash bag left near the fence brought raccoons one night, which brought noise which drew 2 infected by morning. After that, we built a burn barrel system for certain waste and a sealed pit for other materials, downwind and well away from the building. Rachel monitored all of it because disease from poor sanitation would have taken us out faster than any person outside the fence. The first winter scare came early, not from weather, but from people. Around 5 weeks after Rachel's family arrived, we saw smoke from the south tree line in a pattern that looked deliberate. Not wildfire, signal fire. By late afternoon, 3 men and 1 woman appeared at the road with a pickup truck. They stayed outside the gate and called out politely. Their leader introduced himself as Curtis and said they were forming a local security group and going property to bring people under one coordinated plan. That kind of language raises every alarm I have. Curtis was clean, armed, and too smooth. He said they had food stores and fuel and could offer protection if we contributed labor and supplies. He also looked over our fence like he was already measuring what he could take. I told him we were a family group with limited resources and not interested. He smiled and said, "That may not be a sustainable position." Aaron, standing where Curtis could see him, shifted his weight on his healing leg and said nothing. Rachel had Mia in the back room. Curtis left after 5 minutes. He came back after dark. Not to negotiate, to test us. We heard wire cutters at the back fence around 11:20 p.m. Because of our rules, someone was awake and on watch. Mia was asleep. Rachel took her to the closet. Aaron and I moved to the interior barrier. We had planned for this exact thing in theory, but planning and hearing metal snap outside are not the same feeling. They cut one section and pushed through quietly. Then one of them stepped on a line of loose scrap we had intentionally spread under leaves as a noise indicator. We did not set traps, we set alarms. The rattle gave them away. I called out that they were trespassing and needed to leave. A flashlight beam hit the door seam. Someone tried the handle. Another person moved toward the boarded window. We had no interest in a fight, but we were not opening. Aaron banged a steel bar against the interior cabinet to create a deep metallic report from a different angle, making it sound like more people were inside. I cycled the shotgun once, deliberately loud. Rachel, from the back room, activated an old personal alarm device she had found in a supply run and stashed for exactly this purpose. The sudden, high-pitched sound shocked everyone, including me. The people outside panicked and backed off faster than I expected. One shouted, "Forget it." Another cursed Curtis by name. We heard running to the fence line, and then a vehicle start farther down the road. They never returned. After that night, my own refuge became less about a building and more about a principle. We were not waiting for rescue, and we were not handing our lives to the first organized group that showed up. We would trade when safe, help when possible, and defend our line without becoming predators ourselves. That principle got tested a month later when Monica found us. I had not heard from her since her save battery text. Networks had become unreliable, then mostly useless. I assumed she was gone or had evacuated. Then, one rainy afternoon, I saw a woman on a bicycle pushing through mud near the gate. One saddlebag missing, jacket torn at the sleeve, moving with the kind of stubborn rhythm I recognized before I saw her face. I opened the inner door but kept the outer secured and shouted her name. She looked up, stared at the building, and said, "Dan?" in a voice that sounded like she had not expected another familiar voice for a long time. Getting her inside safely took 20 minutes and every precaution Rachel required. Monica was dehydrated, exhausted, and nursing a strained wrist, but otherwise okay. She had stayed at her townhouse in Hummelstown for 2 weeks, then linked up with neighbors, then lost that group during an attempted relocation after a roadblock incident. She traveled mostly by bike and on foot after running out of fuel. She had seen our property from the road days earlier, marked it, and watched before approaching. When I asked why she finally came in the rain, she said, "Because if you built anything, you built drainage, and I needed a place where the floor would be dry." That sounded exactly like Monica. She became the missing piece we did not know we needed. Rachel handled health and routine. Aaron handled mechanical systems. I handled structural and utilities. Monica handled logistics, inventory, and external relations. She created a ledger from old billing books and tracked everything by date and use rate: food, fuel, water treatment tabs, batteries, medical supplies, soap, gloves, even screws. She could tell you not just what we had, but how many days each category would last under normal use and emergency use. She also developed a trade protocol. No one sees inside the building, all exchanges at the outer fence, two-person oversight. No repeated schedule, no trading critical meds unless life-saving. Because yes, by then we were trading. Not often, and not with everyone, but enough to build a loose network of small survivor groups within bicycle and foot range. A retired couple on a farm lane who had chickens but no water treatment chemicals. Two brothers sheltering in a machine shed with a working hand pump and more diesel than food. A church maintenance worker and his mother in a parsonage basement with blankets and canned goods but no tools. We did not become a community in the old sense. We became something leaner. A map of known locations, needs, risks, and people who usually kept their word. That map mattered when the first real cold snap hit. Our refuge had started in early spring and improved through warmer months. By late fall, we were in better shape. Insulated interior sleeping area with salvaged rigid foam panels and plywood, a small vented wood stove made from a repurposed steel cabinet and stovepipe routed through the old wall opening, built carefully with heat shielding and clearances because house fires do not care about your emergency. Rainwater storage, well access, generator use limited to short charging windows, and enough stored food to get through winter if we rationed and supplemented. What we did not have enough of was heating fuel and dry firewood. You cannot just cut live wood anywhere, and burning wet wood in an improvised setup is a good way to fill your shelter with smoke or coat your flue with creosote. So we spent weeks collecting deadfall, broken pallets free of chemical treatment markings, and dimensional lumber from abandoned sites where we could verify it was not painted or contaminated. Monica inspected every load like a foreman. Mia learned wood stacking and could spot mold faster than I could. Aaron repaired a small splitting maul handle. Rachel kept us from overworking in cold rain and ending up sick. Then, in December, a windstorm tore roofing off the pole barn and dropped a large limb onto the rain catch line. We lost one water drum to contamination from debris and nearly lost the gutter setup. That was the night I understood the title of this story in a new way. No one came did not just mean no rescue teams, no government convoy, no miracle. It also meant no contractor, no lineman, no mechanic, no plumber. If something broke, the only person coming was whoever was already in that room. So I went out in sleet at 9:40 p.m. with a headlamp on red filter, a ladder, rope, and a tarp, while Aaron spotted from the doorway and Monica covered watch. Not because it was dramatic, because if I waited until morning and the weather shifted, we could lose more of the roof and then everything inside the barn would be exposed. I tied down what I could, cut away the damaged gutter section, and rigged a temporary bypass into a spare drum. I came back soaked, shaking, and more proud of that ugly tarp job than I had ever been of anything at the warehouse. That winter, we nearly lost Aaron to infection. Not the outbreak, but a regular infection from a splintered hand wound that he ignored for 2 days because he didn't want to waste supplies. Rachel caught it early, cleaned it aggressively, and started treatment from our remaining antibiotics. She then stood in the center of the room and gave all of us a lecture. I still remember almost word for word about how stubbornness is not the same thing as toughness. Nobody argued. Aaron especially. We also nearly lost the generator to bad fuel. Gasoline degrades, water gets into cans, carburetors gum up. Aaron and I tore the unit down on the bench under lantern light and cleaned the carburetor jet with a strand of copper wire, while Monica read steps from a printed manual she had saved from the landscaping company office. When it started again on the third pull, Mia clapped like we had won a championship. We all laughed harder than the moment deserved because by then, any good outcome felt enormous. As months passed, the refuge changed shape physically and socially. We built a secondary sleeping platform for storage underneath. We expanded the interior barrier. We planted a small hidden garden patch behind a brush screen using seeds gathered from stores and trades, beans, squash, potatoes, and hardy greens. The first harvest was not enough to feed us fully, but it changed morale. Eating something you grew with your own hands in a broken world does more for the mind than calories alone. We also changed as people. I had lived alone for years and liked control. In the refuge, control became shared process. Rachel pushed me to explain systems instead of just doing them myself. Aaron pushed me to stop overbuilding everything like I was preparing for a code inspection. Monica pushed all of us to document procedures, so if one person got hurt, the rest could keep the system running. Mia pushed us in quieter ways. She made us celebrate small dates. She drew a calendar on cardboard. She asked questions none of us wanted to ask out loud, like whether schools would ever open again and whether her friends were okay. We never lied to her. We just answered in pieces she could carry. The first time I left the property for more than a day after settling there was the spring after the outbreak, almost a year in. A radio contact from one of the farm groups relayed that there was a larger survivor encampment forming near a municipal site west of us, organized supposedly with water treatment and some trained personnel. They were asking nearby groups to send representatives to discuss trade routes and security information. Curtis's old pitch came back to my mind immediately, and I wanted no part of another smooth-talking takeover. But this sounded different. Multiple independent groups confirmed it. Monica said we needed information even if we did not join. Rachel agreed, but only if we traveled carefully and had a return deadline. I went with Monica. Traveling beyond our known routes after so long felt like stepping onto another planet. We moved by bicycle and on foot, cutting around blockages and avoiding open roads when possible. We saw what time had done. Houses collapsed by neglect. Small fires long burned out. Cars rusting into the shoulders. But we also saw signs of adaptation. Hand-painted warning boards, fenced gardens, rooftop water barrels, and once a school parking lot converted into a barter market under strict entry checks. Not civilization restored. Fragments holding shape. The municipal encampment was real. It occupied a public works yard and adjacent buildings with fenced perimeters, a water tanker setup, latrine trenches done properly, and posted rules that looked practical instead of performative. There were former public works employees, volunteer medics, a few deputies, and a rotating council from nearby groups. They did not demand we move in. They asked what skills we had and what we needed. That distinction told me everything. We traded information, not allegiance. We learned which roads were consistently unsafe, where a bridge had failed, where a creek crossing was still passable, and which groups had become unreliable. We shared our well and filtration lessons. Rachel's sanitation protocols, written by Monica in a clean copy, were requested by 2 other sites. Aaron's fuel storage notes got copied 3 times. For the first time since the outbreak, I felt something I had not let myself feel. Not confidence, exactly, but a future tense. We came back to the refuge with salt, medical dressings, a spool of fencing wire, and a hand-crank radio that became Mia's favorite object in the world. Years later, when people ask how we survived, they expect one answer. Good location, maybe, or weapons, which tells me they have not lived through a long emergency. The truth is less dramatic and more useful. We survived because we built a system and kept improving it. We made rules and followed them when tired. We chose quiet over display. We treated sanitation as seriously as security. We wrote things down. We traded carefully. We learned from mistakes without pretending they did not happen. And when no one came, we stopped waiting. But there were costs. I never found Leah. I spent months trying to track information through every route and group we contacted. I found a record of a school shelter in York County, then a relocation list, then a handwritten note in a church hall ledger with her last name possibly misspelled. I followed leads when I could. Nothing certain. Not knowing is its own kind of wound because it never scars over properly. It just changes shape with time. I also carry the faces of people I did not help on the roads in those first days. I can justify the choices logically. A trapped truck helps no one. Bringing in an unknown person with a hidden injury could have killed all of us. Every practical reason is true. They do not cancel the memory. If you are looking for honesty, there it is. Our refuge itself almost failed twice more after that first winter. Once from a summer heat wave that spoiled stored food faster than expected and pushed our water use beyond safe margins. We solved it by improving buried cash storage, shading the rain drums and changing work hours to early morning and evening. The other time was a structural issue. Settling under one corner of the utility building caused a doorframe shift and wall crack that let wind-driven rain in. If I had ignored it, freeze-thaw would have opened it further. Instead, we excavated around the footing, improved drainage with gravel and a shallow swale, and patched the crack properly with hydraulic cement and exterior sealant scavenged from a contractor yard. Again, boring work. Survival work. Over time, the place stopped looking abandoned, even though from the road it still did. That was intentional. Inside, it became orderly. Shelves labeled. Water treated and dated. Tools hung and maintained. Medical supplies rotated. Dry goods in bins. Wood stacked off the floor. A watchboard by the door. A hand-drawn map of nearby groups with notes on trust and trade. Mia's schoolwork on the wall. Rachel's health check chart. Monica's inventory ledger. Aaron's engine maintenance schedule. My repair list, always longer than I liked. We called it the shop at first. Then Mia started calling it the Refuge, and the name stuck. I remember one particular evening about 2 years in that explains better than any summary what that word meant. It was late fall, just after sunset. Rain tapping on the patched roof. Rachel was teaching Mia fractions using dry beans at the table. Aaron was rebuilding a lantern valve with magnifier glasses on and muttering at tiny threads. Monica was updating the ledger and arguing with me about my estimate for remaining nails in a coffee can because I always round optimistically. The stove was steady. The water barrels were topped off. The watch shift change was in 10 minutes. Outside, the world was still dangerous and uncertain. Inside, we had routine, argument, warmth, and people who knew what each sound in the building meant. That was the moment I realized I had built more than a hideout. If you want the day-by-day version, I could give you months of details. Which road shoulders stayed passable after spring flooding, how many minutes we ran the generator each charging cycle, which brand of gloves tore less, how we modified a wagon axle, which canned goods trade best, how to test a salvaged battery under load, how many inches of clearance we kept from the stovepipe to shielding, how Rachel standardized wound cleaning kits in sealed bags, how Monica marked fuel cans by age and source, how Aaron improvised a hand wash station foot pedal from scrap hinges, how Mia learned to identify weather by cloud shape better than any of us. Those details matter. They are the real story. Big moments make people listen. Repeated small tasks keep people alive. The outbreak did not end cleanly where we were. There was no national announcement we all gathered around on a working television. There was no line on a map where things became safe. What happened instead was uneven. Some areas stabilized faster because they had water, leadership, and fewer people moving through. Some stayed dangerous because they sat on old traffic corridors with constant movement and no consistent control. The infected numbers dropped in some places, rose in others, shifted with seasons, noise, and human mistakes. We adapted and kept adapting. By the third year, our refuge became a support node for newer groups. Not a fortress. Not a command center. Just a reliable place on a route where water was treated correctly, supplies were documented, and people were expected to follow rules. Rachel trained basic first aid and hygiene. Aaron taught small engine maintenance and fuel safety. Monica taught inventory and ration planning to anyone who thought it sounded boring until they ran out of lamp oil a week early. I taught structural patching, weatherproofing, and how to look at a neglected building and decide in 10 minutes whether it could be made safe enough to use or whether it would kill you in a storm. Mia grew up. That may be the hardest part to explain to people who imagine the world freezing in place at the moment of disaster. Kids do not freeze in place. They keep growing. She outgrew the stuffed fox. Her voice changed. She moved from spotting at the window to helping with radio logs to leading short trips to the garden line. Rachel and Aaron did an incredible job giving her a childhood inside a world that did not deserve one. Birthdays with ration desserts, lessons at the table, rules without constant fear in their voices. She once asked me what my job used to be, and when I said maintenance technician, she laughed and said, "That is still your job." She was right. If there is one thing I want anyone hearing this to understand, it is that the survival is not a single decision you make once. It is a job. It is daily, repetitive, unglamorous work. Done when tired, done when scared, done when you would rather sit down and stop thinking. It is checking seals, rotating food, cleaning tools, writing notes, planning routes, fixing leaks, saying no at the gate, saying yes carefully, and making sure the person after you can understand the system if you are not there tomorrow. The day I finally returned to my old duplex was almost 4 years after I left it. I went with Monica on a route that had become manageable. The neighborhood was mostly empty. Some houses were burned out. Some had been occupied and abandoned again. Mine had been entered at least once long ago. The front window was broken. Cabinets ripped open. Mattress cut. The note I had left was gone. In the kitchen, the tape mark where it had been was still on the glass frame. I stood there longer than I expected. Not because I wanted the place back, because that house was the last location where I had lived like rescue was someone else's responsibility. I had gone to the service property thinking I was buying time until help arrived. Instead, I stayed and built a life I never planned for. Before leaving, I found an old metal coffee tin in a cabinet with a few family photos I had forgotten. Leah at our parents' house one Christmas. Me and my father holding a fish neither of us knew how to clean properly. A picture of my warehouse crew at a safety cookout. Brent looking uncomfortable in sunglasses, Monica rolling her eyes behind him. I took the photos and left the rest. When I got back to the refuge that evening, Aaron was cursing at a fuel line fitting. Rachel was organizing a delivery of supplies from the municipal yard, and Mia, no longer a little kid by then, was painting new markings on water drums because she said my handwriting looked like damaged cable. It smelled like soup and wood smoke. The patched roof held through another rain. I put the photo tin on the shelf above my bunk and got back to work. So, yes, I built my own refuge when no one came. I built it with cinder-block walls and scavenged plywood and bad weather and checklists. I built it with a mechanic's repaired engines, a nurse's strict hygiene rules, a logistics lead's ledgers, and a child's ability to make the future feel worth preparing for. I built it by learning that secure means more than locks, that prepared means more than stockpiles, and that realistic means accepting fear without letting it choose every action. It was never perfect. It almost failed more than once. We made mistakes, we carried losses we could not fix, but we stayed. We improved. We helped others when we could do it without destroying ourselves. We stopped waiting for someone else to build safety for us. And in a world where systems broke faster than anyone believed possible, that was enough to start again.